Hello, BookTube. I'd like to do a bit of a book chat. Um, I just finished reading Robert A. Heinlein, edited by Virginia Heinlein, and his Grumbles from the Grave, which is absolutely fantastic cover, Michael Whalen cover, and with a photo, you can see there's a photograph of the author. He was a younger fella. I picked up this book at the Brattle when I went down to visit Steve Donahue, and I videoed it in a haul. I had originally had a copy originally right when it came out, and was very excited to find this because I didn't have it anymore. It's a Del Rey book, Ballantine's book, New York, and this is the first edition of 1990. So the layout and the way the book was put together really stuck with me. You'd have photos of the author and things they were doing. Here's another great one. There were letters about writing, about his various books, his politics, his travel. And I remember thinking how much I enjoyed it and how sorry I was that it was gone. So I decided I was going to reread it. And rereading is always risky. I have reread some of his juveniles, which I loved as a teenager. He wrote for Scribner's for quite a long time. And then when the relationship there got a little strained, he moved on to Putnam's. And I've read many, I think I've read everything he ever wrote, as far as I can tell. I used to read him also in the Science Fiction Digest size magazines. He published and was part of that crew under John W. Campbell. He later went on and wrote for some of the other magazines, and he was really part of that pantheon, and maybe the most important part of that pantheon of science fiction when I was a young man, in the 70s and 80s. And that was Isaac Asimov, Arthur C. Clarke, and Robert A. Heinlein. And Heinlein, by most people that I knew, was considered at the very top of that. So you read everything he put out, and this book gives you a behind-the-scenes glimpse of a very powerful, important writer in his field, and a man who eventually became sort of a cultural icon, moved from the pulps to the slicks, moved from the ghetto of genre publishing into the bestseller lists at early stage when that was happening in science fiction, and a person who is co-opted in a way by popular culture, a person whose Destination Moon is a film, a person who was politically active. So he's a very complex man, and a lot of that comes out. And he's also a great traveler. He started off in the Navy as a young man, got TB. Basically, he had gone to the Naval Academy. He was never able to stay on active duty. He did work in a laboratory for the Navy during World War II. He's very, by his own lights, patriotism was important to him, and of course he had his own version of it, like we all do. So the book actually stood up to the test of time for me. I don't agree with him on everything, but I do admire him in a lot of ways. So I'm glad I reread it. I just wanted to read a few things, a few little sections out here. Um, so here's and these are a lot of these snippets from letters and stuff that his second wife, Virginia, edited. So this is in San Diego, and this gives you a sort of a feel for how he felt about the Navy. July 12th, 1962, Robert A. Heinlein to Lurton Blassingame. And Lurton Blassingame was his agent. My short trip to San Diego and to sea was terrific. A day under the sea in the submarine Raton, spent with destroyers hunting us and trying to simulate depth bombing, which they do with grenades, which make a terrible racket, but at most break a light bulb. Then we flew aboard the carrier Lexington, spent the night watching night operations, then day operations the next day, then flew back to Colorado Springs, where he was living at the time. Elapsed time CS to CS, 54 hours and almost no sleep. The night landings were made by supersonic fighters, Demons, F-3H, and it was the most exciting and the noisiest thing I have ever seen. So, he continues on, she's an angled deck carrier and landings and catapulting go on simultaneously, one of each about every 30 seconds, and they hit it about 130 miles an hour and roar away if they miss the wire. Besides that, I was recognized repeatedly, which boosts my morale. The icing on the cake was a birthday party in the air for me on my way home. Much fun. So he gets to do some exciting stuff. So this next little piece I thought was interesting because of the times we live in. Now, when this was written and I read this, it made no impact on me at all because I read it, I read it in, 1990, and 9/11 changed a lot of things in this country, and his view here was the common American view that I'm going to read, and it is not any longer considered the norm. But when this was done, it would have been easily considered a norm. He's right in 1969, but even when this was published in 1990, I read by it and it never even picked up on it. From there, we went to New Orleans with reservations at St. Charles, and I was asked for identification as we were checking in, which I refused to give. This is not Russia. And we had our bags put into a cab and went to the Pontchartrain, where we wound up in the Mary Martin suite without being asked to produce IDs. I can see why Mary Martin stays in the suite. The Aga Khan would be quite comfortable in it. It was late and we were exhausted. He's just flabbergasted that somebody would ask for his ID. And that's the way the world was here. And a lot of that changed in 9/11. My first driver's license, which I got in, I think, 1975 or 76, was merely a typed, colored piece of paper with no image. Merely said that I had an operator's license. So, yeah, a lot has changed. Another little section, he's talking to somebody who took Stranger in a Strange Land to the extreme, and some of these, he calls them cults, but these groups were trying to use it as a guide for living, and he felt that, well, he was trying to be respectful of them. He had never written it as a book that was supposed to give the answers, he says. He was written it as a book that asked questions, and then everybody would work their way through himself. So he goes, now for some background on A Stranger and my stories in general. I write for the following reasons: to support myself and my family, to entertain my readers, and if possible, to cause my readers to think. The first two of these reasons are indispensable and constitute together a commonplace market transaction. I have always had to work for a living, for myself, and now for my dependents, and I come from a poor country family. So, and then he goes on, if a writer does not entertain his readers, all he is producing is paper dirty on one side. And I must always bear in mind that my prospective reader could have spent his recreation money on beer rather than on my stories. I have to be aware every minute that I am competing for beer money and that the customer does not have to buy. If I produced, let us say, potatoes or beef, I could be sure that my product had some value in the market. But a story that the customers do not enjoy reading is worth nothing. So when anyone asks me why I write, if the quick answer, standing up, I simply say, for money. Any other short answer is dishonest, and any writer who forgets that his prime purpose is to wrangle, say, 95 cents out of a customer who needs not buy at all simply does not get published. He is not a writer, he just thinks he is. Oh, surely one hears a lot of crap about art and self-expression and duty to mankind. But when it comes down to the crunch, there your book is on the newsstand along with hundreds of others with just as pretty covers, and the customer does not have to buy. If a writer fails to entertain, he fails to put food on the table, and then there is no unemployment insurance for freelance writers. So he had a very practical, that does not mean he did not want to do the best work he could. And throughout this this whole thing, you get the sense of the struggle of the writer. Now, he was very well paid for the time and very famous. And he reacted to editors mucking about with his stories, not liking his viewpoint all the time. But the conversations with him and his agents were very businesslike, and he would work on things. He would redo things. Stranger in the Strange Land became an exception in some ways because he wrote it intentionally without thinking it was going to have a market, and he just wanted to do it that one time. So he had a view of writing that maybe not everyone holds, but that I found interesting. And if you like books about writing and you want to read a book about a person who was at the time of his death considered the very grand master of the genre, and a person who had such an influence, this is a wonderful book. So in the back here, they've got a bibliography with all this stuff, fiction, nonfiction, and all that stuff. So I think it was a great book to reread, and one I enjoyed very much. And if you are in the writing game, it might be one you want to check out. So thank you, BookTube.